Okay, so our series, this is part 3, it's called Counterform. The idea behind it is that every culture has predominant narratives that, like this barista pushing the coffee, will push and form you. Everybody has them, every culture has them. The gospel narrative, or the way of Christ, will affirm and challenge every cultural narrative in different ways, depending on the culture. And so we're trying to consider the hope of this series is how are the narratives that are surrounding us both encouraging us toward God or also pushing us away from God. So the first step is to consider what are those narratives, and then consider what is the way of Christ? How is it different? How might it change us? That's the point of counterformation. Today's narrative is massive. It is like the biggest Big Daddy narrative in America. It's the biggest one. It's super intimidating. It is the water you swim in. You don't even know it's there. It's so much there. Next slide. I can't control it. So next, it is this. It's a big narrative. You feel its pressure. And at the same time, ironically, it's the shortest narrative. It's just 3 words. Next slide. It is this. The suspense is great. You do you. Nope, not that far. You do you. That is it. That's the cultural narrative that I think is the strongest American narrative. Individualism. You do you, man. You do you. Ultimately, it's almost a sacred space of you thinking and me thinking, I'm in this too. Every American's in this, in some sense, because it's just the oxygen that we're into. Every American, in some sense, has to grapple with this idea that your self-autonomy is sacred. Your independence is sacred. That freedom that you have to basically live however you want without obligations to others is just in our cultural bones. You do you, right? So that's there. Let me give you some objective data to support this idea. Next picture. So Brendan Case writes in his recent article for the Common Good magazine, as recently as the 1960s, Americans used the first-person singular pronoun I and the plural we in roughly equal proportions. By 2019, however, I had become twice as common as we in all forms of U.S. media. So we're just much more self-referencing than we have been before. That's data. It's not a qualification of morality. It's just saying that we talk about ourselves a lot as I, me, you do you. So you have that. Also, this is sociologist Dave Kinnaman found that 91% of Americans surveyed affirmed this statement: to find yourself, you need to look inside yourself, right? Everything I need is here. Now, if that's the case, then these are the natural supporting narratives for that idea. My own mind is a source and standard of truth. So no matter what, I am right. Also, my emotions are authoritative. So never question or let anyone else question my feelings. So more objective data, just in case you want a little more. Next slide. Anthropologist Geert Hofstede created this famous research construct to consider how individualistic is a nation. So this is the spectrum of collective or individualistic. And these are the countries they surveyed. Basically, he surveyed a bunch of people from a bunch of different countries, really robust study, to determine when the individuals in that country think, do they think in terms of I, individually, or do they think in terms of we? Now the top score, the most individualistic country in the top score is 91. Guess who got the 91? Right? Top of the class, baby. Top of the class. We win, the old red, white, and blue, 91. We're the red, the darkest color. That's us. So we live in an individualistic country. This is objective. This is not me thinking it. This is not pastor speak. We just do. We think in terms of self. We reference self a lot. We take lots of selfies. Our nation is very individualistic in how we think. Also, Colorado is one of the more individualistic states in the Union. Think about the people that first settled Colorado, the pioneers. They broke away from their communities in the east. They came here. They crossed mountains and canyons and rivers. They found this valley, and at the top of it, they named it Independence Pass. And at the bottom of it, they named it Defiance. That's our name right here. The city of Glenwood Springs was first known as Defiance. This is a pretty individualistic culture, is it not? So what we are doing today is likely a fool's errand, because in like a 3-hour movie, I get a 15-second commercial to push upward like an ant pounding on a world of granite to say there might be another narrative than hyper-individualism. I think. And I think the gospel puts that out, that you were created to belong to others. I think that's the gospel's narrative. It's not you do you, it's actually the opposite of you do you. It's a different kind of narrative. And so to try to go against it seems crazy. Here's one person that tried. I think he did a great effort. His name is David Foster Wallace. In 2005, he gave a commencement speech to a group of graduates at Kenyon College, a real elite college in Ohio. Anyways, he gave this speech, and it's probably one of the most famous commencement speeches ever. It's fitting that I give it this morning because we're in commencement season. And you've been to lots of graduations probably. You know that most of those speeches are nonsense, right? Like you get that they don't really touch ground in any lived experience of adults. They're just a lot of platitudes and gibbly-gooks, mostly. But he gave a speech that I think was unique in that it's insightful to adult experience. It's also very honest as he grapples with hyper-individualism himself and figures out, is there a way we can be counterformed? That's really what he's thinking about. So picture yourself there. You have all these students, these new graduates in cap and gowns. You got their parents behind them who have paid a king's ransom in tuition to send them to this elite school. And you have the grandparents behind those parents who are just happy to be there. And then you have this small man on a big stage who's about to talk honestly about the hyper-individualism that drives us. Here's what he said. I'll read some of his speech. David Foster Wallace. He writes, "A huge percentage of the stuff that I tend to be automatically certain of, it turns out, is totally wrong and deluded. Here's one example of the wrongness of something I tend to be automatically sure of. It's my deep belief that I am the absolute center of the universe, the realest, most vivid, and most important person in existence. We rarely talk about this sort of natural, basic self-centeredness because it's so socially repulsive. But it's pretty much the same for all of us, deep down. It's our default setting, hardwired into our motherboards at birth. But learning how to think as a student really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and choose how you construct meaning from experience. Because if you cannot exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed." What he's really doing right there is first step. He's thinking about counterformation. And before you're counterformed, you have to think about what you think about and what's shaping you. Then he goes on. This may sound like hyperbole or abstract nonsense, so let's get concrete. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors don't have any clue what day in and day out really means. There happen to be whole large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement speeches. True. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I mean. By way of example, let's say it's an average day. You get up in the morning, you go to your job, and you work hard for 9 or 10 hours. At the end of the day, you're tired and you're stressed out, and all you want to do is go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for a couple of hours. But then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week. So now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of the workday, and the traffic is very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should, and when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded. Because, of course, it's the time of the day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. And it's pretty much the last place you want to be. But you can't just get in and get out quickly. You have to maneuver your junky cart through all those other tired, hurried people with carts. And of course, there's also slow old people and spacey people and the ADHD kids who block the aisle, and you have to grit your teeth and try to be polite as you ask them to let you by. And eventually, finally, you get all your supper supplies, Except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush, so the checkout line is incredibly long, which is infuriating. But you can't take your fury out on the frantic lady working the register who's overworked at a job, whose daily tedium surpasses the imagination of any of us here at this prestigious university. Anyway, you finally get to the front of the line, pay for your food, and then you get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. Then you take your flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with that one front wheel that pulls irritably to the left. Through the parking lot, you try to load the bags in your car in such a way that everything doesn't fall or roll around in the trunk on your way home. Huh? The point is that petty, frustrating junk like this is exactly where the work of choosing comes in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be angry and miserable every time I go to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hunger, my fatigue, and my desire just to get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. Look, if you choose to think this way, fine, lots of us do. Except that thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic. Thinking this way is my natural default setting. It's the automatic way I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The only thing that's capital T true is that you can get to decide how you're going to try to see life. You can consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. You can decide what to worship. Because here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everyone worships. The only choice is what we choose to worship. And the really important kind of freedom involves being truly able to care about other people and sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty, unsexy ways every day. That's real freedom. Not you do you. What he's trying to pitch to them is the idea of belonging, right? He's trying to push upward against a massive gravity that actually you find contentment, you find purpose in belonging to other people. And you have to choose that because it's not your natural default setting. Sadly, 3 years after this speech, despairing of life, brilliant though he was and lonesome, David Foster Wallace took his own life. Because you can know that you have to have something bigger than yourself to worship. And you have to have a focus that's outside of yourself. But knowing is not enough cognitively. You must belong. You have to belong. And that's the gospel narrative that we're going to explore today. Next slide is this. You were created to belong to others. I know that seems so crazy. And everything I'm saying is like me trying to force feed you broccoli initially. It feels that way because our culture is so single-serving. But at the same time, God feeds us by laying out a feast, a family feast. So we're going to dig into it and try at least to think about what would it be if we were really created to belong to others. So let's start at the beginning and consider this. And keep your eyes on the pronouns. The pronouns are huge in this sermon. Let's begin at the beginning with the creation account. Genesis 1, verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." The animals are all created, but then something different happens. Next line. Then God said, "Let us make man or mankind in our image and in our likeness." Hard to miss those pronouns. Pretty amazing if you think about it. So humans were created for community by a God who is triune, I know this is a mind melter because there is no other analogy that recommends this to us. There is nothing like the triune God. So every analogy is impoverished when it tries to liken something to the Trinity. But the truth is, we were created in the image of God, who is himself a community of persons, which means that for eternity, God has been giving and receiving love in community. So you have been etched and cut out with the same DNA to bear that image, created to belong to other people. That's just who we are. So when we fight against that, we will always be fighting our own design. That's why it feels wrong. Every human that's isolated is a human in crisis. They're a human that isn't living the life that God created fully and is getting by. So that's what we see right there. First of all, you just belonging to others is in your DNA. It's what God intended. He belongs. And you're made in his image. So isolation, hyper-individualism just won't ever feel right to you and won't bear life. It doesn't lead to flourishing. Secondly, we thrive in the face of difficulty when we belong to others as we're intended to. It's perfect. Mother's Day. It's today. And it's good that it is. Because Mother's Day and parenting in general is something that will reveal the impoverishedness of trying to do life on your own. Parenting is hard. It's just hard. I got little kids. I got 3 of them. I remember some months back, we had just a horrible week. Horrid week. It's like all the kids were sick with the flu. Vaughn flushed a toothbrush down the toilet. I had to try to get after that. We had this smoke alarm that randomly would go off only in the REM depths of night. Woke up one morning and the battery was dead on the car. We have a bunch of commitments on the calendar, so I'm stressed already. I tell you what, I was in a black, foul mood. And I was not a little harsh with Michelle and those kids. I wasn't. I was at the point, they're like, they're your kids. Right? That's what it does. And in those moments, you feel like a failure. Yeah? Because you feel grumpy. And the weird thing about when you feel grumpy is, and you know you're in a bad mood, then you feel guilty, and it puts you in a worse mood. Doesn't it? She's like, oh, I stink. Well, that's what parenting is. And first step for that is obviously repentance. See, God, we belong to God. So you go to God with that and say, like, that's not right. And you seek forgiveness. And then, I'll tell you what, just a half hour with another couple of fathers, Christian dads, is golden. Even if they're different ages. We don't have to say a lot. There could just be a lot of, I know what you mean. Because that's how it is. None of us are that unique. I mean, that's what David Foster Wallace is pushing against. You need each other because God didn't create life for you to live in the fast food drive-in lane. No, he sets a table and we're fed together. That's the concept. We're fed together. We're meant to sit by each other, to nourish each other. And in community, we multiply each other's joys and divide each other's sorrows. That's a simple math of community. You're not meant to be alone. You're not. I don't care how big your house is and how big your yard is and whether or not you put a fence up around your life. You're not meant to live that way. You need more people than you and even your own family. You need people that aren't related to you, people that are objective, people that aren't biased, who just come in and say, yes. It's why Hebrews 10 was written. Let us hold fast the confession of our faith without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good work, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as the day of Christ draws near. You're meant to do life with other people, and sometimes you feel like such a screw-up, and you'll take that on you, and that kind of fraud mentality, that kind of imposter syndrome that you take up toward a role that you should have, will just crush you alone. You're going to get worked in the corner by yourself. It's when you take that kind of failure out of the darkness that you can break its back with the help of other people. And Christians are your brothers and sisters. You were created for other people. That's the concept. We eat together. We've been studying the Lord's Prayer. It's the most famous prayer in all the world. And there's a passage in it that says, we have it up there, we should, but Jesus is saying, give us this day our daily bread. Hey, when you pray, I want you to pray, give us this day our daily bread. Look at the pronouns. He doesn't pray, give me this day my daily bread. How we would pray it as Americans, give me. But it assumes that, first of all, you pray this as a people, but also you think about provision as a people. We eat together, like you're nourished and strengthened together. Give us this day our daily bread. And so some things like parenting well, they just expose the idea that doing things in isolation is an impoverished scarcity mentality. And being single well is also so hard that you can't do that well without other people. You need other people. It's just too hard. And there's a family table God has created, a feast where the family gets together. It's messy sometimes. It's the premise of this yellow sheet. It's a covenant for life together. The members that we take in next week, they've all signed this, and you can sign it too. It's so un-American. Like if I was trying to grow a church, this was my only thing. More bodies, more bodies. I would never give you this, ever. It's the worst advertising on the planet for people that want to be isolated, and that's just our natural thing. Because what you're saying here is, I'm going to give my life away to other people when that gets messy. You ever been to a real family meal? Sometimes it's chaos, and they're talking politics. It's like a Thanksgiving meal. It's real messy and chaotic, but that's where life takes place. And so you can look that over and sign it if you want. We got a big board in the back. We got a staple gun right here. Doesn't work. There it does. It does work. You staple that sucker to that. It's just a reminder and embodied practice for you to say, I am not my own. I am not going to be an idiot. See, that's not a slang. Idiot is a Greek word. It means to yourself. That's where the word comes from. It means a person that's to themselves. You're just weaker by yourself. So if you want to thrive in the design God created for you, He created you to belong to others. That's at least the contention that the Bible makes, and I'm going to get behind it. Next slide. And lastly, this. We were created for awe. Awe. Awe is a big deal. 35,000 people every year try to summit Mount Everest. This is pretty crazy. 3.5 million people every year go to Grand Canyon. 30 million people every year go to Niagara Falls. We hunt awe. We just do. We hunt it. We were created to have awe in our lives, to feel small and to feel awe. There's this amazing study. Next slide. There's this amazing study done by a social scientist from UC Irving. Basically, what he and his team did was to put people, took this control group, this research group, and he took half of the group. And the study is called Awe, the Small Self, and Pro-Social Behavior. What he did is he took this group of people, half of them, he just put in an ugly city street. Spend time there. And he took the other half and he put them in a forest, like this redwood forest. And then they observed what took place. And for the group that was in the city street, unlike the group in the redwood forest, they experienced awe. And they found that consistently, they found this big study, consistently, the people that were in these experiences of awe were more pro-social, more generous, more kind to each other, more helping to each other. Because when you feel small and you're in awe, it makes you more generous and big-hearted to other people. So that's what they found. It's a great insight. But here's what's difficult about that. It's hard to create ongoing awe, isn't it? Like the first time you're in the redwood forest, it's awesome. First time a person comes to Glenwood Springs, I've seen it 1 trillion times at the hot springs. They always take pictures of Red Mountain. They love that. And they're like, and especially if they move there, they're like, I can't believe I get to live here. It's like Disney World. Guess what? Ask them 100th time they go to the hot springs pool. They're like, yeah, I got to get my groceries, and there's that left wheel on the cart they got to push through the, right? We just lose awe. I'm going to tell you something that it's not from a pastor. It's just from a person that's hunted awe for a bunch of decades. Is this. Adult awe fades. It just does. Adult awe. If you experience the same stimuli that produced awe in you, if you keep experiencing, it will diminish its awe. Here's the other thing that I found. There's a kind of awe that I've found that's not diminished over decades. It has pretty good staying power. It's the awe of being touched by the generous grace of God. It's just different. It is different. I'm going to make a pitch to you. I think it's true. It's borne out for me. It might bear out for you too. But the idea that God would love me so much, flawed as I am, to go to incredibly deep lengths to draw me into himself to belong, and then into a people to belong together and grow up. That just has staying power of awe producing. So it does produce more generosity, more pro-social behavior. It can, because it is an ongoing novelty. It's the only ongoing novelty I had. Marriage is awesome. It doesn't feel like when you just got married, right? It's different when you're courting. There is a kind of awe that you were created for that's deep and will draw you into people, because that's how God meets you, individually, corporately. That's his shape. And it continues to hit you. I remember about a month ago, I've read the Bible like crazy. I mean, it's probably no surprise. I read a lot of the Bible. I read the New Testament a lot. A few months ago, I was reading the passage about Jesus being first seen by Mary after he was risen from the dead. And she grabs him and tries to hug him, And then Jesus says this. He goes, "Oh, don't cling to me, but go tell my brothers the good news." You know what? I never saw that before. That little possessive pronoun, my. It's so huge. Like, here's Jesus. Just a few hours before, days before, he's abandoned by these guys. They're traitors. They refuse to even acknowledge that they know him. Oh, I don't know Jesus. They're totally false. Totally false. And he had poured 3 years of his life into them. And immediately what he says is, go tell my brothers. He's still faithful. I think that's amazing. That's amazing, amazing, amazing. To be treated so horribly, but be so faithful. Only God does that. And that kind of love will change you. That's an ongoing, perpetual awe when you're touched by the grace of God, which can draw you into people. It's the only reason on the planet I would sign this. I'm super individualistic. I'll tell you that. Being a pastor, that doesn't change anything. Like, if I'm cooking bacon, there's 2 pieces of bacon, and one burns, that's Michelle's bacon. I'm not joking. I think about me, just like you do. You're selfish, you're self-focused, you worship yourself. If there's a comfortable chair in a room and there's 2, you want the chair that's more comfortable. You think about you. Even mothers, it's Mother's Day, they will give themselves away, but they think about their own family, right? That's just how we are, that's how we operate. The only reason I would staple this to that thing and say, I'm promising to give myself away to you, is if I've been touched by God to say, I am loved so much, I got a bunch of house chips to spend. That's how it works. So here's our forge question is this. Good question to end on. Do you belong? Fire that. Do you belong? That's a great question. First to God, he created you for himself, and then to other people. Do you belong? It's not complicated. Like, are you in the family of God because of the work Christ did on the cross for you and your trust in that? Like, I want your leadership over me. I trust you with my life. You take it. That's what conversion is about. I trust you with my life. You take it. I want you to be my God. I want you to take over. I want you to be king. It's not enough to know things about God. I trust you. And I believe that you love me so much with that stubborn love that this sacrifice was done for my behalf, because God wants me. That's a big thing when you let God want you. He wants you. And I accept that. I accept that he wants me. I don't know why. I do not know why, broken as I am, but I accept that he wants me. I belong now. I'm a son of God because Christ, God's son, his righteousness is over me. When God looks at me, the Father, he sees his son. That's what the gospel is, right? Gospel narrative. You have been created to belong to God and then to others. Do you belong to people of God? Like real life, not strangers, in the trenches. You multiply each other's joys, you divide each other's sorrows. If that's not your case and you've been kind of a consumer, this is a good time to get into it. This is a step for it. This will discipline you. It's actually not about anybody else mostly. It's about you. Like, I'm making this claim to myself to defeat the you do you mantra that I feel all the time and oftentimes surrender to. So that's a pushback against that as well. So let's give you a minute to think about that. Who do you belong to? Do you belong? You can. The grace of God is open. Have the worship team come up while we think and pray.